Michael, this morning we had the privilege of doing an interview with Penny Partridge.
Oh my goodness.
And I know. And she said the same thing when I said we were going to be interviewing you this afternoon. And I was thinking about how we all came together at Jim Gritter's open adoption conferences in Traverse City, Michigan, every other year for a long time. And that was the first time I had a chance to hear you and just became enamored with your perspective on the whole adoption community. And so it feels so important to me that people listen to who you are and what you bring to the table. And so I wonder, when I go out and speak, or when I used to go out and speak, people would introduce me and I'd want to say, well, don't say that, don't say that. This is really what I want you to say. So rather than my introducing you, why don't you introduce yourself and bring forth those things that you most want the viewers to know about you?
With respect to adoption, probably, right?
Well, we'll go next to the larger part of Michael Trout and what else makes him tick and what he enjoys. But starting out with the adoption and pre and perinatal part of your life, of your world.
Sure. Well, I suppose the most critical learning I've had to do over the last half century has been um, trying to understand just how this thing works, that helpless, teeny organisms seem to be digesting their experience and storing it in some way. None of us knew how they did that.
Right.
Uh, if we ask a 6-month-old baby, what do you remember about birth or prenatal life? They never had much to say about it at all. And that led a lot of researchers, believe it or not, I make fun of it on purpose. Believe it or not, it led them to believe babies therefore did not have memory, did not have any method for storing their own experience. So I had a ways to come along there as well, to not only grasp that that was the case, that was a central principle to my training in infant mental health, but to understand how that happened, which then raised the issues of retrieval, which then had implications for clinical practice. Because in sitting in a room with let's say a 5-year-old who had had a terrible, terrible beginning in an orphanage in Romania, or a 25-year-old who was furious and unattached and determined to never be attached to anybody or anything, I needed to know how do I help this person retrieve where they've been, what happened then, not necessarily the facts, but the feeling about what happened then, and what did they take away from that? Um, a sense of maybe only a sense of being small, of being insignificant, of being pushed to the side, of cleaving to the side. Nobody pushed me there. I just thought I should hide away because it's better that I not make a fuss. Because you know what happens when you make a fuss, you get either aborted, or if you come to birth, you get thrown away. You get sent to another adoptive home. So that's probably the biggest thing. How do we store memory, and how do we retrieve it later? With that came a huge amount of growing confidence over the years. That experience matters, of course. And so that became both a threat and a gift to adopted people that I worked with.
Huh.
It was really a terrible threat. Many, many, many people came into my office over the years, maybe not even revealing that they had been adopted right away, but even when they did, or when I discovered it, declining to go there at all. They were very angry that I would think it was of any importance and wanted them to talk about it. So we had to figure that part out too. But I thought it was potentially a gift, or I wouldn't have challenged people so much. I thought it would be a gift for them to know where they came from and why they are the way they are now, why they've been the way they've been, maybe with their own babies. So that was the second big thing.
Ooh, those are huge. When
Yeah.
you look at where you were when you started with that exploration or that awakening that you're discovering or you're discussing here, where are you today? I
Oh
mean,
my Lord. I hardly recognize myself.
how
You
so?
know, I started out in a gigantic old-time mental hospital, an asylum, 6,000 patients.
Whoa.
And I was trained as a behaviorist. And that's what we did in those days in the 60s.
Yep.
So to go from there to training in psychodynamic theory and child psychoanalysis was just a gigantic, bizarre leap. Most of my friends from the early days thought I had abandoned them, and some of them thought even worse of me. And I couldn't understand either why did Selma Freiberg appeal to me? Why did her stories about the experiences of babies and young children just make sense to me? I didn't know, but so that was a huge leap. The next huge one though came about in the era during which I knew you, because it was at Traverse City that I first was challenged in my early theories, very important to my training at the time, that babies were sentient. That I knew that.
Uh-huh.
I knew they thought and felt and stored memories, but we really firmly believed that the whole process of attachment began well after birth and was slow and vulnerable. I still believe it's slow and vulnerable, by the way,
Uh-huh.
but I firmly believe that it didn't begin until after birth. And I said so, as you may recall, from the podium in Traverse City to a bunch of folks like you. You were kind enough to smile at me. Others thought I was a complete bozo. Um, and I slowly began to pick up, not because people challenged me. I'm a hard-nosed sort of guy. Being challenged neither bothers me nor changes my mind necessarily, but being around those folks and others over the next few years made me rethink this whole matter of when can attachment begin. And of course, nothing could, well, I shouldn't say nothing. Few things can be as any more important to understand about an adopted person than that.
Right.
What was there between me and my first mom?
And you've come to believe what is there between that child and their first mom in utero?
Well, of course, I remain scientifically modest enough to say I don't really know, but I no longer believe that it's nothing.
Okay.
And I believe that it's profound for both parties,
Yes.
not just for the child, but for the mom as well.
Yeah.
And so, as you know from the study group we've been a part of together, if the mom is determined to not become attached because she knows she's going to relinquish her child for adoption, we think, people like me and you think that's kind of important and has a potentially dramatic effect on the child. And here's the part that I was slow to catch on to. The ways that has a dramatic effect on the child then carries into his expectation relative to future attachments, to wit, the first adoptive mother.
Mm-hmm.
And that poor adoptive mom has her arms open and her heart supposedly open, and she's greeted sometimes, not always, but sometimes, by a child who wants absolutely nothing to do with her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the importance of the prenatal experience is, I've come to appreciate, is hugely important.
Well, you've been a real leader for all of us, because you combined your knowledge of that pre and perinatal world and your mental health world and put it or connected it, attached it to adoption. So you became an added arm to the way that we think about pregnancy and delivery and attachment and separation and reattachment. And so I want to thank you for that. you mentioned this study group. Would you like to say a little bit more about a goal of a group of people hungering to figure this out and what that group has been exploring?
Well, yes, but I should say that our goals have been modest, to say the least. Many would wish we would gallop off, and I don't see that we're quite ready to gallop off. Our original goal was extremely simple. Can we bring to bear from what we know, and we being people like me who've been clinicians for years, others are adopted persons themselves, others have adopted children themselves, some have even birthed children and then relinquished them for adoption. Others have more experience even than I in prenatal psychology and so on. So we all come together to try to address one question. Is there anything we know that would help make the transition work better? That's all. That was our whole thing. And we didn't even know what that meant. Should we work on a ritual? Should we work on what people say to each other prenatally? Should we enhance the adoptive mom's relationship with the birth mom? Should they get to know each other even better? That's a very popular thing, as you know. Or if when we do that, do we violate other rights and stampede over things that we don't want to stampede over? So it got complicated very quickly. And I don't say that we got stuck. I would just say that we didn't have magic. We just had a lot of ideas, and we've talked them over now for whatever it's been, 2.5 years. And maybe someday we'll have an idea or two. In the meantime, we've come to see that, for example, the prenatal life of a child who is being held in surrogacy is not innocuous. The prenatal life of a child who's being held in this place in preparation for going to another place is not innocuous. And we've talked that over a lot. We've done some independent research on that and brought it to each other and so on.
And it feels to me like the adopted people connected to this process have such a deep investment and a personal understanding, but not always the words to express what that has meant. And I think so much of what makes this hard is, from my perspective, there is no easy answer. There is no perfect way. And that the very temperament of that in utero baby is already complicit in what occurs before and after birth and then into the arms of another family.
Yes.
So we try to find answers for things that are each so different. We don't have none of those are the same, and that makes it really difficult. And I've been saying that about adoption for a long time. Everyone's in a distinctly different experience that we have to let unfold. I'm so grateful that you're doing that group, and I'm hoping it continues for a very long time, that it doesn't get frustrating, because we definitely need that information. What brought you to this work? What do you think about your own background, your own childhood, that led you into mental health and then led you down this road?
Well, I certainly wasn't headed here. I headed to divinity school first and was a washout, not because I failed the classes, but because I didn't belong there in the first place. It was silly of me. My dad was a pastor, and I suppose I was following in his footsteps, but thought I would be a radical pastor or a radical professor, maybe something like that. But that did not work well. And I stumbled really into that huge asylum I worked at in order to do alternative service as a conscientious objector to war during the biggest years of Vietnam. And so I was washed in mental health without meaning to be. I was suddenly thrust onto wards where people had been sitting for 50 years and charged with the job of freeing them from mental illness, we would joke, but what we really meant is just somehow making it possible for them to live on the outside, maybe. But from there went on to Michigan, which was sort of my dream place to live. Got a wonderful job, but was recruited very early on, not because of any genius of mine, just pure happenstance, to participate in this weird training program by this exceedingly difficult, strange lady named Selma Freiberg, who didn't want to teach students. She was on the faculty in child psychoanalysis at Michigan, but didn't really like grad students very much. But she got talked into by a magnificent lady in the Department of Mental Health there. She got talked into accepting 6 students on a special program that she would teach what she had learned about blind babies, first of all, and then how she had extended that into work with other clinical work with other babies and their mothers. And I sat in the very first event of that and was simply captured. I mean, it was all over.
Okay.
Literally, there was not one moment in the, whatever it's been, 50 years now, since that first day in class that I looked back or doubted. I doubted myself. I couldn't, this was so complicated and so difficult and so wrenching. And there were moments where I tried to round up my classmates to make a little rebellion. We were sure at one point that Freiberg knew a bunch of answers that she just was not giving us about what to do out there in the trenches with difficult moms and dads and babies. And that didn't work very well, mostly because Freiberg didn't fight us on it. She just smiled and looked at us and knew that we'd discover it, and the discovery of it would make us much better clinicians than if she told us.
Wow.
So that's how I stumbled into it.
And what brought you to the adoption piece of it? How did you end up with Jim Gritter at an open adoption conference? I don't remember how you got there.
Well, I don't think it was because I reached out into the adoption world. It was more just the happenstance of clinical practice. When you become known as the baby guy in town, people bring you their babies, many of whom are adoptees,
Okay.
and many of whom the parents are themselves adopted, although they will declare till the end of time that doesn't matter. But they'll nonetheless show up on the doorstep of the baby guy in town. And there was usually only one, because in those days there just weren't that many people in infant mental health. So I got to know an awful lot of adopted people, an awful lot of adoptive parents, and then finally an awful lot of grown-ups who came to me even though they weren't even interested in their babies, but they were adopted people themselves. And very, very slowly, I began to discover stories and then to learn.
Wow. So I can imagine that a lot of people watching this interview, Michael, would say, what's baby therapy? What does a baby person do? How do you work with babies?
Well, fortunately, we don't have to worry about that question very much, because the tool we use is really the relationship with the baby's mother or father. So we never, at least some have violated this provision, but never see a baby alone. I don't even see children alone very often, or didn't when I was in practice, but always with the mother or father. And we would simply sit together and we would watch the baby, and the mother or father would react to the baby and then tell stories and then scream at the baby and then threaten the baby and then throw me out, and then I'd come back anyway. And next week, Dad would greet me on the front doorstep with a broom in his hand and tell me I better get off his porch, and so on. And with all that mess, all that mix-up, we began to make relationships.
Okay.
And as Selma would teach us, to the extent to which we're able to hold the mother, had it been later years, she would have said also the father, to the extent to which we're able to hold the mother, she will hold her baby. And my golly, that turned out to be true. Including, by the way, those cases in which we failed to hold the mother. We couldn't get our arms around her. Her pathology, her rage, her hurt was too great, and she would not let us in. And those mothers were often unable to hold their babies. You understand, I mean that metaphorically as well as literally.
Yes, absolutely. But so glad you're saying that out loud. I've had the privilege of listening to you so often that I go where you go automatically, but I'm aware that there are people who'll be watching who may be unfamiliar with much of this. So it's important to, spell it out a bit. What else makes up Michael Trout? I mean, you're a wonderful teacher. You've got a great deal of wisdom, tremendous compassion, great curiosity. Those are words I would use to describe you. What else is important in your life? What holds you?
Well, it's at least a dozen pictures floated through my mind as you asked the question. We don't have time for all of them, but certainly my grandpa came to my mind, and my grandmother, who were very different from each other and had very different effects on my life. But I really go to them in my soul and in my mind, not infrequently. Perhaps in a similar way to the way many people will go to their primary attachment figure in their mind, or to God, or to something like that that holds the base.
Yes.
I know what to do because of Granny. She didn't know anything about infant mental health, but she knew how to hold me, and she certainly did while I was being not held so well by very, very young alcoholic parents. Granny would hold me. Grandpa would hold me also, but in his own absolutely nonverbal, grumpy way. But he also. Okay. So they do that. But other things in my life that interest me greatly are also, they may sound silly to your listeners, but I'm an old-time rural Indiana car geek, like all boys in Indiana. And I love cars to this day, and I get great pleasure from waxing mine. And I love basketball, like every boy who grew up in Indiana. And that's given me great pleasure. And of course, being with my own children as well.
Yeah. Did you play basketball growing up?
Oh, I was terrible at it. I was a klutz. My dad didn't do anything. No sports, no tools, nothing. And he didn't teach me anything. And I shouldn't blame him for that, because I could have learned on my own, but I didn't. And so I loved shooting baskets and I loved playing basketball, but boy, you never want to have me on your team, because I still recall in 7th grade, we moved every year when I was young, every single year. And I was new on at Springs Valley, it was called, which is French Lick, Indiana. And Larry Bird had not, I don't even know if he'd been born yet, but he certainly wasn't there yet. But of all things, that school, teeny weeny little school, went to the state championship that year. So the whole town was nutso about basketball. So I walked out on the playground first day since we moved there. And the boys yelled at me, "Hey, kid, come over here." They threw me the ball and said, "Come on, play with us." So they threw me the ball. I tucked that sucker under my arm and started running toward the basket. I thought maybe that's what you were supposed to do. And of course, the entire playground of boys just were howling with laughter. So that was kind of my life. Often not fitting in very well, but for some reason not being crushed by that. Probably, again, because of Grandpa and my grandmother.
Well, I thank them profoundly, because we're all blessed. We're all blessed by you. You have a lot of wisdom, and in the short time that we have, I'm curious, what things do you want people watching this to come away with? If you had pieces of wisdom that you wanted to leave, what would they be? What's important for you to say?
Well, for goodness sakes, be curious. That would be number one. If you can't do anything else, be that. And if you be that as a mother or as a teacher, but also as a clinician, if you can just be that one thing, you'll probably be head and shoulders above anybody else in your profession. If you can add to that the ability to follow, to really earnestly follow another human being, a child or a friend or a patient, if you can just follow and show that you're following with your face and your eyes and your body and so on, that person may just feel seen, not just heard, but really, really heard, seen.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think would be, I know it is a gift to them.
Mm-hmm.
So those would be the two biggest things. And if I could just throw in one final thing, I let someone talk me into doing 3 sessions of supervision for them recently. I don't do that very often, but I was taken by the way this person asked for my help. And she was just dying on the vine, both in her clinical practice and in her consulting work in classrooms, where she had worked with the same group of teachers for 5 years. And they still, she said, they still ignore me. They don't do anything I say. They don't like me. And I don't know why I keep going back there. Mm. And very long story short, it's not that long. It's only 3 sessions I saw her, but this is what we discovered. That those teachers wanted exactly the same thing that babies want. Exactly the same thing that parents want. They just want to be seen. So stop telling them what to do. Stop being smart. Stop having ideas for them. And instead, just ask them, how is it? How is it in general in the classroom? And how is it with that child you've been telling me about? What happens to you when you're with that child or in that classroom? And lo and behold, she said the very next time she went in there and she did that, they just looked at her with a start as if, well, where did you come from?
Wow.
You're the lady that tells us what to do. And we wish we didn't have to spend the hour with. And now you're suddenly showing interest in us. Wow. So something about that I wish to hand to people as well. Just believe in what you bring to bear. Believe that being with someone counts way more than anything you could do for them or with them. Exactly the same as a parent with a child.
Mm. That's beautiful. Thank you. When you're gone, which I hope won't be for a very long time, and people pass by you in wherever it is you remain, if there's a headstone there and it says, "Here lies Michael Trout," what would you like written on there?
It's funny that you ask, because it's come to me just recently. I don't know why. By the way, we already have our headstones, Mary and I, but it can be added. Okay. If I had the perfect tribute to me, would be he saw me. Mm. And I would want that from the lips of my boys, as well as my patients. If just a few felt that from me, I'd feel like this life was very worth living.
Well, I always feel seen by you. And I always feel like it's a privilege to learn from you. And I want to thank you immensely for the time that you've given. And I wonder if you have any final thoughts.
Well, the things we've said in the last few minutes have sort of been final thoughts. Okay. I would sure hope that those struggling right now, particularly those in clinical practice, as physicians or as psychologists or as adoption workers, child welfare workers, if you're not having any fun, I'd sure wish for you that you could back away long enough to figure out why, and don't do self-criticism. Don't do self-examination in the self-critical way. Just think about why. And I'm betting the reason has something to do with the fact that you lost passion and you lost belief in yourself a long time ago. Maybe you started thinking you needed to do more and know more, and maybe you don't. Maybe you need to just be more. Maybe you are enough.
That will be a wonderful, wonderful thing for so many of our very tired frontline workers and parents. So
Yes.
many of our parents are so tired. And I those are the calls I get all the time. I'm so tired. I don't know how much longer I can do this. And so thank you. That's really lovely.
You're so welcome.
Have a wonderful rest of the day. And I hope that we get a chance to cross paths again soon, probably not in person, but at least on Zoom. And I still occasionally think I'd love to pop back in. Something will come up from your group meeting, and I think, oh, I have so much I want to say about that.
You always did.
It's a lovely, lovely gathering. Say hello to everybody for me, and say hello to Mary for me, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Okay.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.